So, good evening, everyone. Welcome to the communications panel. We have with us today Ms. Keisha Humphrey.
Hi.
Keisha, I will allow her to introduce herself and give a little background. But Keisha, essentially what happens today is Keisha will guide the discussion. It's not a formal session with a PowerPoint and all that. It's more supposed to be a discussion. So you have the opportunity to ask your specific questions and to take advantage of her presence with us. So Keisha, if you can just give a quick introduction.
Sure. Can everybody hear me well?
They're all on mute.
Oh, okay. Well, as Erica said, I'm Keisha Humphrey Mears. I've been in communications for a little while. I've worked in the media and publishing industry. I've worked in manufacturing. I've also worked in financial services and now work in the insurance industry. I started out very junior in communications. I now work in communications and marketing management. So I do think I have a decent breadth of experience when it comes to communications, and I'm really happy to be here this evening. I don't know, anything else y'all would like to know, you can ask.
I think that's a nice brief intro. So we can maybe start with the most substantive issues.
Okay.
But thank you for that.
You're welcome.
So at this point, Keisha will start by she had provided a little discussion paper. So Keisha, you can take it from there.
Sure. When it comes to communications, I think sometimes people tend to overthink what's necessary or try to apply, although that's important as well, apply more of a scientific or a theoretical approach. So that's also important. But for people who are not used to the communications field, or people who, as y'all are into like civil society organizations or NGOs, I always try to say, think about your organization and what your organization's story is. And the best thing to do is to start by telling your story. And I think it was author Annette Simmons who says, whoever tells the best story wins. Storytelling is the best way to get your story across and to communicate in the best way possible, the simplest way possible. Every organization has a story to tell, pretty much. It's just about how you frame that story and how you get that story out to the public and what medium you use. You can use written stories, it can be oral, it could be on social media, and that's the most important thing. What is your organization's story? So you can think about that first and foremost and let that guide how your communications is crafted. And that's really what communications is. It is the art of telling the story of your organization. And so the better that you can tell that story, the more support that you can garner from your stakeholder groups. In terms of how you frame the story, that's also important. So in terms of strategic communications, you want to ask yourself, what is my organization seeking to achieve? Do we want to focus on advocacy? Do we want to focus on organizational communications? Do we want to focus on behavior change communications? And it can either be one or two or a combination of all three of these things. And then you also have to think of what are the overarching goals of the organization? And then, of course, this cannot ever be discounted. What are the values of the organization? What is your mission? What is your vision? Sometimes people tend to go ahead and create objectives and go ahead and create goals for their communications planning. And sometimes it's not aligned with their mission or aligned with their vision. Everything that you do even though it doesn't seem like it at the time, has to be aligned with the mission and vision of your organization, because ultimately it has to come back to that. In terms of, again, strategic communications, you want to develop your objectives first and foremost. Am I going too quickly? Please feel free to stop me in between, because I tend to go all over the place.
No, go ahead. It's fine.
Okay. So the first thing you want to do when creating a strategic communications plan, again, try to think of your mission, try to think of your vision, try to think of your organizational goals, what it is that you're trying to achieve. What you also want to do is create objectives. That's the first thing that you need to do. But I should go back a little bit and say, before you do that, you have to audit the communications channels that you currently have. So look at what you have and then look at where you want to be. So the first thing you want to do is create objectives, and those need to be SMART. So they need to be specific as you can possibly get. They need to be measurable, something that you can go back and look at. So for example, if you say, I want to have 50 people know about my organization by our 6 month or our half year mark. So then you can go back and say, okay, I only got 30, I got 60. So then you're able to measure or quantify that objective. You also want your objectives to be appropriate. Is it making sense for what you're trying to do? They also need to be realistic. A lot of the times, CSOs and NGOs, they don't necessarily make objectives that are realistic to the organization. We try to think very, very big, and well, that's really good. And ambitious, it's good to be ambitious. You also need to be realistic about your environment, what other organizations are going through, and what it is that you can indeed achieve with the objectives that you're setting out. And then, of course, they need to be time bound. You can't just make objectives and then decide, okay, well, maybe 10 years, 20 years down the line, we'll come back to it. You need to have a specific time period in mind. And
but sorry, this thing of objectives, because I find that people get a little tied up with setting clear and SMART objectives, and also differentiating an objective from a goal, for example. So if maybe, I don't want to put you on the spot with, to come up with an example, but at least if you can explain the difference between an objective and a goal.
Okay. I think goals are a little bit more short term. Objectives, I think, are a little bit more long term. At least that's how I see it. Goals are for certain efforts. Objectives are more with specific targets in mind, but the two can be used interchangeably. But I think objectives are more time related. A goal is more into endeavors and different things.
Okay, thank you.
No problem. Where were we? So we've set the goals, we've set the objectives for the organization. What do we need to do next? We need to set a strategy. We need to put strategies in place. That can be an overarching strategic strategies, a strategy statement, or you can break that down by objectives. Sometimes what I like to do is match each objective with a strategy, and that helps me to more hone into what it is that I want to do. So for example, if I have 4 or 5 objectives, I'll try to match each objective with a strategy, as opposed to having one strategy for every single objective. And what your strategy is supposed to do is to tell you, how are you going to get your objectives achieved? That's what your strategy is. After you create your strategy, you then go on to develop your tactics, and your tactics will then tell you how your strategies are going to be achieved. So everything is linked. And after that, you have your measurement and evaluation. Everything that you do, as I mentioned before, needs to be measured. Are your strategies working? And then you don't necessarily have to wait till you're at the end of the communications program to do your measurement. Your measurement can be on an ongoing basis so that you can continue to tweak the communication strategy as you go along. And of course, in there, you also need to determine what your key messages are, what your target audiences are, and how you're going to reach them, what tools and channels you're going to use. You can also map out roles and responsibilities for the stakeholders in your organization. You include a calendar in there as well, so that gives you a bird's eye view of what your timeline is supposed to look like. And of course, you also have to include a budget. You can also include a space in there for crisis communications as well, which is a whole different dynamic in and of itself. If you're going to get into communication strategy again, you need to also segment your audiences. So who are the important audiences for your organization? Sometimes people like to say, okay, I want everybody. And while that may be so, and everybody may indeed help you to get the awareness that you're looking for, it always helps for you to zero in on your audiences. So I like to always segment my audiences by internal and external, because internal audiences have different needs than your external audiences. You're not going to communicate with them in the same way. So for example, your internal audiences may look like, if you have a board of directors, it may look like your wider team members. Your external audiences now are going to look like the people that you're looking to influence, your media stakeholders, your sponsor partners, whether it is current sponsor partners that you have or potential sponsor partners that you're looking to come on board, and then stakeholders in each of these sectors. Again, going back to the issue of you want everybody, you want general public. I think there's a marketer called Seth Godin who's fairly popular, and he always says, I remember he used a very good example, that if you put blue dye in a pool, you're going to see how blue the dye is because it's a contained space. So you can see the impact of that blue dye. But if you put a drop of blue dye in an entire ocean, you're not going to be able to see the impact of it because of the breadth of water that's there. I like to map that back to communications. If you go broad with your communications and you go general public, you may not be able to see the impact. That's why sometimes people will tell you, well, I spent a lot on radio or I spent a lot on print, but you still have pockets of people that have never heard about your organization, don't know what you're doing. And then you kind of wonder, well, but I spent so much money on this, or I use those channels. Sometimes it makes sense for you what you need to do is then zero in on specific audiences, and that helps you to spread your message. And once those stakeholders have your message, they can then spread it for you, and it will grow its own legs, so to speak.
Any questions? Any questions for Keisha? Okay, continue, Keisha.
So we've segmented our audiences in our communications plan. So we've split them out. Let me just make sure I'm going the right way. So we've mapped out our objectives. So we've decided, okay, I want to create a certain amount of awareness in X amount of time. I want to convert how many other people into evangelists. Those are our objectives. We decide that the strategies we want to take is to use a mix of both traditional and social media to reach those audiences. What are the tactics that we're going to engage? So we split our audiences by internal and external. So for example, you have, as I said, board of directors. You don't want the board of directors to be a separate and distinct audience from what's happening in the day-to-day of the organization. They need to be regularly updated. They need to know what's happening. So one of the tactics you can use is to have regular meetings with them to assist them in understanding what is being done and how it's being done, how objectives are being met. Sometimes something as simple as ongoing communications with your internal stakeholders can mean success or failure for your communications plan. And then, of course, externally. For example, your sponsor partners. Do you send updates on developments with the sponsorship to inform how the funds are being spent, or how the funds and how the events and initiatives are going? And that's for current partners. With potential partners, is it that have you researched your organization to ensure that the goals of the organization that you're reaching out to and the organization and the goals of your own organization align? I know a lot of the time in my current capacity, we get a lot of proposals from CSOs and NGOs, and a lot of the times, our own organizational goals, well, the proposal may always be a good one. I see a lot of good proposals. Sometimes the goals of our organizations don't match up. And I always say to people, sometimes it would be nice if CSOs and NGOs do research on the organizations that they're reaching out to say, okay, let me go on their website, let me go on their social media channels, let me look at their annual report, for example, to see what are the goals of this organization. And a lot of organizations will have their corporate social responsibility efforts and their corporate citizenry efforts in the public domain for people to see. So that, for example, if I am running the Salvation Army, I know that if I am reaching out to a particular organization that has community development as one of their objectives or as one of their CSR initiatives, then I know that my organization is a perfect fit for them. Is that making sense? As opposed to just sending out a mass email and hoping that somebody then comes to say, okay, I'll support your organization. I think sometimes a lot of CSOs and NGOs need to do the research necessary to see what organizations they're aligned to and what organizations are aligned with them.
Yes. No, I think you're fine. I don't know if anyone has any comments on that point, but it goes back to the session last week when we were talking about partnering.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah. So then what other tactics can we engage? In terms of traditional media, there's a lot that can be done. And traditional media is both broadcast and print media. So broadcast would be radio and television, print media being newspapers and magazines and whatnot. So what can you do then as tactics to engage the traditional media space? You can have regular media conferences. You can have media releases. You can have fact sheets. You can ensure that when any of the executives or principals of the organization go out to speak, that they have key messages in their speeches. You can do one-on-one exclusive interviews, update interviews as well. That includes sound bites for radio. And then, of course, just generally strengthening the relationship with media personnel. I always say in corporate communications, sometimes people only contact the media when there's a story, but the media relationship is not unlike any other relationship that needs to be nurtured. Sometimes you can just call the media to say, how is everything going? Just want to send you an update on what's happening with us. Sometimes people only call when there's a story, and sometimes you can just reach out to the editors, find out how they're doing. That's a relationship that needs to be built. I think sometimes that's the difference between the organizations or the NGOs and CSOs that get lots of coverage and the NGOs and CSOs that get minimal coverage. It's the relationship between the two. In terms of, and then of course you also need to tell, as I said, as I started with, you need to tell good stories. I know a lot of the times in PR, and you'll see it in the print media as well, we have a lot of what we call grip and grin. So just somebody shaking somebody's hand and handing over a check. There is a movement towards getting away from that and really trying to tell a story about your organization. or a story about the organization that is funding you beyond just handing over a check. So you have to make things that are of value to the media. So sometimes it's not always conducive or good for the organization for you to just call up all of the media houses to say, okay, please come to my check handover. We have to understand the schedule that the media operates in. They have a newspaper to put out the next day. They're always on deadlines. They have multiple assignments to go to. So when you engage the media in that way, make sure that when they come that you have a good soundbite to give them. And that includes having things like statistics to say, okay, we were able to increase our donor funding by X% over this year, because the media does like numbers and does like statistics. You also have to ensure that you have a spokesperson who is well versed in what's happening with the organization. A lot of CSOs and NGOs do have corporate communications people as their spokespeople, so you can use them. But sometimes the corporate communications person is not always the best public facing person, because there may be somebody else in the organization who knows about something or that particular topic even better than the PR person. And that person might be the best person to face the media at that particular time. Also, if you're sending news releases, find what they're calling a good lead. While the story might be important to you as the organization, you have to think about it from the public's point of view and from an editorial point of view. Is it something that the editor is interested in? Is it something that the public is going to be interested in? So think about it from that perspective as well. Something even as simple as giving a strong quote. Who's going to be quoted in the media release? Something as important as giving a good photo. As I said, get away from the grip and grains, but a picture that really tells a story as well. Hold on, I'm just trying to find my notes. Great. Do we have any questions? Then, of course, making sure that the story is balanced. Always using your 5 W's and an H, your who, your what, your when, your where, your why. And then, of course, do any research that you need to do. Do interview style, use statistics, as I said before. Frame the story around the larger goals of your organization as well. We spoke about photography. And then in terms of online media is now getting a larger share of the pie than traditional media. I think in terms of the Caribbean, though, we are a little bit slower to catch up because we do still depend on traditional media for a lot of our communications output. But steadily and surely, social media is, getting on par with traditional media, but we still have a ways to go because in the Caribbean, we still do like to pick up our newspaper and read the news or turn on the television and read the news. But I think, as I said, steadily social media has been becoming a heavy source of information and a strong communications tool for any organization. And what can people do to engage or to utilize online media engagement strategies? A lot of the time, as I said, pictures work really well. So you can have robust photo albums that, again, tell the story of your organization. Sometimes you go on NGOs or NGO social media portals or CSO social media portals, and you can see that the page is not is not complete, is incomplete. You can see it's not finished. So something as simple as populating the space about the about space for your organization. Sometimes you go there and there's nothing about the organization. So for example, if a reporter is hunting for information, they should be able to go on your social media page, whether it's your Facebook or Instagram page, to look in that about space and see what your organization is working towards. Also, you can have a lot of live video sessions. A lot of organizations and governments, non-governmental and governmental, use the Facebook and Instagram tool to get the news out there. And what that means is that you don't have to have a third party or a middle person transporting that information for you. You don't have to wait on the reporter to then share that story with you, or you don't have to wait until you read the story in the newspaper the next day to get the reporter's perspective. You have a direct channel to your audience. So your audience can tune in and get that information firsthand for themselves. So that's a really good way for people to reach their audiences directly through those live sessions. And all that requires is, the tools are really easy to use. So that just requires some video and, as I said, just a good spokesperson. And you can organize those posts so you can tell audiences ahead of time that there's going to be a live session so that they can feed in. But with social media, you also have to be cautious that engagement is key. So I think having a content strategy makes perfect sense. You have to be able to have enough content to share every day. People like information in real time, and they like social media is very instantaneous. So a lot of the times, because NGOs and CSOs don't have the financial resources to have somebody who can continuously update the content, you go on pages and again, you see the last post was in 2018 or 2017, and it can almost create an impression that nothing is happening with the organization, when in truth and in fact, the organization may still be active, but it is not reflected on their social media portals. So again, just being able to keep the information current and to have a content strategy so that if there is a day that you're not sure what to post, you would have already built out that content so that it can just be quickly pushed out. And then, of course, that also goes for website content as well. Website content needs to be continuously updated so that it reflects the current goals and objectives of the organization. And what it also means is that it needs to be optimized for search engines as well. And that's a big thing in the marketing and communication space as well. How do you get your website number one on Google so that when people put in your organization, that's the first thing that they see? Even if it is the first thing that they see, you want that when they go onto the website, it has the information that is there. And that also means updating it with any recent press releases, whether the press releases have been published or not, just to get the information out there, because you never know who is scouring the web page for information, whether it be a reporter, a potential donor, somebody who's generally interested in volunteering for the organization and such like. And then you also want to think about, when developing your communication strategy, you want to think about your key messages. What do you want to communicate about your organization that can impact people? And when you can think about 4 or 5, I usually don't try not to go past 6 for my key messages, so there's not too many that you continuously want to push out whenever you push out content or communication. So that could be making sure that it is included in your chairman's speech, making sure that it is included somewhere in your press release, making sure that it is included somewhere in your video content. And what that helps to do is to continuously reinforce whatever message it is that you're trying to communicate about your organization and get out there. And what that will also do, developing key messages, is to help with your measurement and evaluation. So that if you run a survey and you ask someone, okay, did you recall X message, and they can then tell you yes or no, and you would then know, okay, maybe I needed to have push out my key messages more, maybe I needed to have revised my key message a little bit or tweak it. What we also want to be careful of is outcomes, what we call outcomes versus outputs. Sometimes and we are very guilty of it in organizations, sometimes we tend to focus a lot on outputs. So what we will do is we will use the number of published press releases as what we call a KPI, a key performance indicator. So for example, did we get our press release published in, excuse me, did we get our press release published in 4 newspapers? And sometimes everybody will do a big song on that because your press release appeared 4 or 5 times. And that's good. But when it comes to your measurement and evaluation, it is not only about how many press releases you have placed or how many video releases you have placed or how many times your organization was mentioned positively. If it is as a CSO or NGO, you're looking for behavior change, you have to then focus on the outcome, and you have to think about your outcome first. What outcome do I want from my communication strategy? Is it that I want, let's say, for example, you're a NGO focused on HIV/AIDS. Is it that I want more people to practice the use of condoms? So then you're looking at, this is the outcome that I want. And if at the end of your communications strategy that you have not achieved that outcome, then you need to rework that strategy. So again, focusing on outcomes as a good balance of outcomes and outputs, and not just necessarily focusing on the output itself. Is that clear?
Yes, that's clear.
One moment. There's a let's see. There's a question for you. How do we keep content and organize an agenda when some CSOs or NGOs may be plagued by membership issues? How do we tackle that?
Sorry, tell me that question again.
Yeah, I'm not sure I understand it. It says, how do we keep content and organize an agenda when some CSOs or NGOs may be plagued by membership issues? How do we tackle that?
Oh, in terms of issues of resources?
I guess, to me, understand is how do they deal with their priorities when they have these, I may be wrong, but how do you deal with your priorities and setting your agenda and all of that if the organization is challenged by membership issues?
To me, it sounds like a challenge of human resources, that you don't necessarily have all the resources that you need to focus on marketing or focus on communications, which happens quite a lot because that usually it takes a lot of time and it takes a lot of input. Sometimes people have to just double up on things. So if you are what we in Barbados call the chief cook and bottle washer, it may mean that you may have to serve as president, you may have to serve as a marketer, you may have to serve as a communicator, you may have to serve as a treasurer all in one. So it may mean that you may need to double up on 1 or 2 members may need to double up on the effort so that they can get the messaging out. But it also means that you need to determine what's most important to your organization and what's going to get the job done. Because if it is that the head of your organization focuses more on relationships to get the job done, so the person does a lot of face-to-face interaction, then it may be that you may not need to focus on a strong communication strategy that includes traditional and online media. But if it is that is important for the organization and you recognize that is what is needed to push the organization forward, then you may need to get some of your resources to double up on, as I said, managing the organization and doing the PR as well. Does that answer the question?
But yeah, I agree with you. I think it's really more organizational issue that would in turn have an effect on your ability to properly communicate.
Yeah.
But if the membership issues are such that it doesn't even allow you to properly set your agenda, etc., I would suggest there's a fundamental issue within the organization, and you may have to revert to, whatever solutions your benefit may offer. But it's a really a deep organizational issue.
Yeah, I definitely think so. But to increase membership is an objective. So if that is an objective, then you determine how you're going to get that done. Whether it is, and again, that doesn't necessarily need an entire communication strategy. That can be part of a strategy. But if expanding your membership is something that is important to the organization, what it means is that you could possibly, and again, you have to tailor your strategies and your tactics to match the resources and match the budget that you have. So if I'm a larger organization and I want to grow my membership, I may make a call for membership in the media, I may do a press interview, I may do something on radio and continuously push that we're looking for members. If I don't have those resources at my disposal, it may be that I can use the network that I have. So if the membership is currently, for example, at 10, then I can say to everybody, okay, well, everybody bring somebody else, or everybody bring 5 more people, and we increase the membership that way. So again, you have to tailor your strategies and tailor your tactics to match the resources that you have until such time as you have the bigger resources in place to play with.
If I can add to that as well, one way you can do that as well in terms of working with your limited resources is in your partnerships and your networking.
That's
then
right.
you'll be able to, link with a partner that has the resources that you're looking for. And that does not necessarily mean financial resources.
Exactly. So yeah, because most people tend to know somebody else that you can then, as I said, bring along or use their expertise in a particular area. Where were we at? So we pretty much did we cover tools and channels, strategies, roles and responsibilities? So just to kind of go over what's required in a communications plan, you should have a strong introduction that speaks to what the organization is about, what the organization does. You should outline your objectives as specific as possible. Outline who your target audiences are and how you intend to reach them. What channels are they using? Come up with a few key messages that you can use to continuously funnel. Come up with different tools and channels. Outline strategies, and those strategies will tell you how you achieve the objectives that you've outlined. Come up with tactics, and the tactics will tell you how you are going to achieve your strategies. Again, you can also come up with roles or responsibilities for each person in your organization. Build out a calendar to say when each activity is going to happen. Come up with your budget, and of course, do your measurement and evaluation to see how your communications is working.
So that you're finished, Keisha?
Let me just double check my notes.
Because I need to know if the class have any questions, especially as they are embarking on developing their own communications strategies. It's a good opportunity, just as the question was asked, to try to get some input from Keisha while you have her. It's going to be primarily focused on social media.
Okay.
So if there are any questions you want to ask about the peculiarities of, working through social media, how do you target? Because I know from the little I do, for example, with Facebook and, having to define the audience, the target audience, you have when you're doing the ads and boosting on Facebook. And sometimes that's a challenge for me to determine, okay, should I limit this to persons between a certain age only in Barbados? Should I go further out? How long should I run this for? What should I be looking, in terms of the analytics and the reports? Okay,
Right.
look at the numbers, but then things like concepts like organic, they call it organic sharing, and and really understanding how to use the tools online properly and to analyze the information to know that I am actually on way to achieving the targets. So that was me. I'm not doing the course as such. So I would ask that the students, put forward any questions they may have.
But to your point, though, so social media it's not as emerging anymore. It is a lot more commonplace now than a couple of years before. So people are getting a lot more au fait with it. But even what you just described, social media has allowed us to quantify our efforts a lot more, which is why a lot of organizations are using social media and kind of moving away from traditional media, because, well, marketing budgets and budgets anywhere are getting a lot smaller than they used to be. And you need to kind of justify spend everywhere. So when you use social media and you're able to say, okay, I'm targeting females 18 to 25 age category that live in Barbados, you can then say to somebody, okay, I targeted this amount of people and this is what we got for it. As opposed to when you use traditional media, which up until this point still only uses circulation figures as the measurement, what they can usually tell you is, okay, we circulate to about 60,000 people. And that's a little bit more difficult for you to quantify, and it's a little bit more difficult for you to zero in on. So that's what makes social media so attractive, in addition to the fact that once you have good content, it kind of just spreads, and it makes it, well, quote unquote, easy for CSOs and NGOs to kind of get their message out there. But the engagement is not just about putting content out. It is also about having people speak to you as well. It's about the engagement and making it two-way, having that communication be two-way, so that people then ask you questions and you respond, interact with your content and share that content for it to then spread in the way that you would like.
So I actually, since no one's asking, I have a question. Sure. Recently, I did an ad in the newspaper, traditional media, which cost almost $3,000 to do.
Yeah.
And then after I booked the ad, I was told, oh, but you could also do it on using our social media tool. There it would be $100 to run it for a week or whatever. To an audience of over 100, almost 200,000.
Yeah.
And I was like, but wait a minute. Well, if I knew that was an option, I wouldn't have done the $3,000 ad. I was thinking, how am I going to justify that? I mean, going forward, to my mind, I'm saying I just need to spend the $100 and reach the 200,000 people.
Well, it depends. It depends on who you're talking to, because there are people who will see your newspaper ad, but are those the people that you are targeting? If you are, I think sometimes as marketers and communicators, we need to ask the right questions, because what will happen is the advertising executive will sell you what's going to get the greatest commission for them. And
Yeah,
that's okay,
I realized. I was like,
that,
oh, wait a
but
minute.
that's what they're supposed to do. I don't blame them for that. You need
No.
to ask the right questions, and we need to ask the right questions. So we need to say, okay, what are the demographics that are reading the newspapers nowadays? What are your numbers looking like? What are your age categories? Who are the people reading the newspapers? And if they say to you, okay, well, ours, for example, our Sunday newspapers garner an audience of over 60,000, and we mostly have people in the 55 to 60 age category. If you are running a campaign or doing something that speaks to that specific audience, by all means, spend the $3,000 because you know you're liable to reach that person. But if it is that you're trying to reach a completely different demographic on social media, by all means, spend the $100. But it depends on who you're speaking to. I think sometimes we tend to cast out a net to hope we get some fish, but we need to be more focused with our efforts.
Well, to be honest, I wanted the widest possible audience, but it was a congratulatory ad.
Okay.
I saw it really, I still thought having it in the traditional media on Sunday, that it was a classier thing.
Right, yeah.
It had a bit more class than just pushing it out on social media.
That's true.
I must admit, I didn't ask anything about questions about audience. I think I do have a sense of the audience. But to my mind, I just thought it was classier. And if I'm going to do something like that, if I'm trying to say, acknowledge an accomplishment or whatever.
Yeah, that's more suited to a newspaper. I completely agree with you. That's not something that I would just do on social media. I would do in addition to the newspaper as well. There are things that will happen like that outside of campaigns or outside of initiatives that would just have a good look and feel, that would just raise the profile of the organization. So yeah, you do have to make those determinations. But I do think generally though, in terms of running campaigns and having specific objectives in mind, we do need to target specific audiences and speak to specific people and find out where are those people residing. Is it that you have a large set of young people now who are more going on Instagram than Facebook? So you need to determine, okay, is my audience on Instagram or is it on Facebook? Is my audience on Snapchat or is my audience watching the CBC Evening News at 7 p.m.? Is my audience watching Morning Barbados or is my audience reading the Business Authority? So I do think it is a matter of you determining where your audiences are and funneling the content to those audiences with the correct medium.
Okay, any other questions? All right.
Not for right now. I think what I'll do once I go through the material, if anything, I'll try to reach out via email if I have questions. But for right now, I think what she's trying to get across is very clear.
All right, so Lyle, what you have to say is, are you available?
Yeah, of course.
Okay.
Yeah, of course.
Thank you.
Send me an email at any time. That's fine.
All right, so I will let them, I will share the contact info then.
Sure.
Okay.
And I think it was also important to note, specifically with CSOs, I think a lot of the times we also need to audit the tools that we're using. A lot of CSOs and NGOs like to use only brochures to communicate their messages. But again, depending on who you're talking to, that might not necessarily be the best channel. But I see a lot of brochures, and a lot of the time, people will just take them and leave them in the vehicle or throw them away. Is it that you can funnel those resources elsewhere to do something that is more impactful with the same amount of money? So again, we need to make a review of the tools that we're using. Is it that we can do a press interview? Is it that we can do some type of guerrilla marketing that captures people's attention for that particular point in time? So again, just looking at the tools that we're using to get the message out and just trying to do things differently sometimes.
All right, on that note, Kwesi Grant here from Guyana. I have a question. Well, I posted a question on the group chat. Let me read that question is there a difference between a communication strategy and a communication plan? And my additional question based on what you just said about having the right tools, should we do a market research when we craft our message and using our tools? Because sometimes, as you said, we print brochures and then we distribute, and we find that that doesn't bring about the behavior change or the response that we want. We have to do a market research, craft our tools, and then pilot our tools and the channel before we a widespread campaign. Once we have to have the resources to do it.
Yeah.
Should that be the approach, or yeah?
Of course, that's always the recommended approach to do your market research first, if it is that you can do that. But again, market research is always costly. If it is that you can afford to do the market research and then use the results to inform your communication strategy, by all means, so that you can then tailor your tools and your messaging to suit what the results of your research. But if it is that you can't do the research, you can still go ahead and formulate a plan that should be, once you have the correct objectives in place, you can still go ahead and formulate a plan that can make sense. In terms of the first question, the difference between a communication strategy and a plan. The plan is your overall mechanism. The strategy is a portion of the overall plan. That makes sense. Your plan encompasses your objectives and your audiences and your messages and your tools. And the strategy is a part of that overall plan. But if you can't afford to do the research, go ahead and do the research. But it depends on what you're trying to achieve. So that will determine if you require research or not.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome.
All right, Keisha, thank you so much. I really have to, express the appreciation to Keisha, because the original person, she got called into jury duty at the last moment, and she recommended Keisha, and Keisha really came on very last minute, but I think she was very effective and she did it with a lot of enthusiasm. And she's willing to share her contact for questions. So on behalf of the students who are here and those who will be listening to the recording, thank you a million times, Keisha. I know Wendy's back because we've lost Wendy for a minute. But thank you very, very much. Appreciate it. It was very good.
Thank you. You're most welcome. I know sometimes I tend to talk all over the place, but you do have my contact, Erica, so you can share it with the team. If anybody needs to reach out, I can share some sample communications plans. Not all of them may be suited to CSO or NGOs, but I think you can tweak them where necessary.
All right, folks, so I'm going to be sending out some communication soon, because I have formally requested the extension, and we're thinking that we will try to use the extra time to really do more mentorship sessions and push back the last couple class sessions until later. So we will, once they confirm, which I'm hoping will happen this week, I'll send out communication, and then we're going to be pushing you to really try and do your worksheets and build out the plan. All right?
Thank you.
All right.
Thank you. Have a good evening.
All right, you as well.
Take care, everyone, and good night.
Bye, everybody, and thanks, Keisha.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, Keisha. Bye.
You're welcome.